Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be discussing golden crosses and death crosses. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I wasn't actually planning on making a dedicated video for this because I actually think these indicators are sort of hyped up beyond the actual value that they provide. But given that there has been a lot of discussion around them, I do want to make a dedicated video going through the golden crosses and death crosses. All right. So we're going to look at this on the daily time frame and the weekly time frame, and just sort of look to see what is it telling us. Now, a golden cross in this instance on the daily time frame, how we're referring to it, is a cross where the 50-day SMA crosses above the 200-day. So essentially, the idea is that the average price of the last 50 days is now above the average price from the last 200 days. And when this occurs, there's obviously a bit of bullish sentiment because in the short term, the price is higher than the average price from the last 200 days. So everyone's a bit more excited than they otherwise would be. There's a few interesting patterns, though, trends that we've seen from prior cycles with respect to these golden crosses, and I thought that would be somewhat useful to take a look at. One of the things that can often happen with golden crosses and death crosses is that you hear golden cross, and usually people just immediately think, well, that means the price is going to go up like a lot. Or if you hear death cross, you might think, oh, that means price is going to go down. In reality, to a large extent, it's just a lagging indicator. To get a golden cross, you typically need a fairly nice move. To get a death cross, you need a pretty negative move. So it sort of tells you what you already know, though you could argue there are some traders who wait for these sorts of things to occur to get confirmation of a trend reversal. But let's actually take a look last cycle and see what happened, all right? Because a lot of times in the short term, it can do the opposite of what you expect. And don't take my word for it, right? Let's just look at the chart. Golden cross. The first golden cross we had in 2019, the year after the bear market year, right? So 2018 was the bear market year. 2019, our recovery year. Golden cross right here. The trend eventually continued, but what happened in the short term? We had a dump. And the price of Bitcoin dropped about 14% from this high here to this low. And it was also after, again, a very similar move up, right? I mean, there was a pretty nice move up here and consolidation for a little bit. This was a 14% move to the downside. To give you an idea of what a 14% move to the downside would look like today, it would get the price of Bitcoin back down to around $19,000, $20,000, okay? Just to give you an idea. A very similar type move would look something like that. But then we ended up having a death cross not that long later. I mean, the golden cross was in April. The death cross here was in October. And wouldn't you know, we actually pumped going into that death cross by about 42%. So again, the golden crosses and death crosses are great at grabbing headlines and that sort of stuff. But oftentimes when you see golden cross, the price goes down in the short term. And when you see death cross, the price goes up in the short term. What do you notice about both of these cases, though? Golden cross here, while the price initially dropped, the trend actually continued higher. And while the death cross showed the price initially go up, the price still continued lower. So again, it was sort of just a confirmation of that trend change. And then when you actually get the headline of golden cross and death cross, it does the opposite of what you expect in the short term. So golden cross, price dumped. Death cross, price pumped. Here was another golden cross. And what happened, right? The price dumped about 10%. Right here, we had a death cross. And what do you think happened? Right, or sorry, a golden cross. This was the death cross right here. And in the death cross, you can see that, I mean, the price of Bitcoin was actually rallying up into it. I mean, I don't know exactly when it occurred. It actually looks like in this case, you actually had a dump on the death cross. So that's sort of an outlier. Here, we had a golden cross and the price dropped about 12% or so. This is a very common thing we see with Bitcoin. where you get these golden crosses, and instead of doing what you might assume, you actually see a short-term move in the opposite direction. But in general, what's interesting is when you got this golden cross, while you had a short-term dump, the trend still was up for a while. With this death cross, you had a short-term pump, the trend was down for a while. This was sort of like an outlier. I mean, we know what happened back over here in early 2020. I mean, this was affecting all financial markets. So I don't know if we should put a lot of weight into this. But again, you can see a golden cross, the price dropped. Here, the golden cross, price dropped. Here's another interesting trend, and this sort of goes back all the way from several cycles ago. And one of the interesting things is if you look at the first sort of recovery year after about a year or 6 months or so of a bear market, maybe not even quite that, but around there, you can see that it only took one golden cross to sort of get into a bull market that took us to new highs. One golden cross. During the second cycle, after the bear market year, once we got into sort of our recovery year, you can see it took two golden crosses to get into that next bull market that took us to new all-time highs. And then this cycle over here, the third one, the third recovery year, it took three golden crosses before we actually got into a bull market that took us to new all-time highs. So I'm not trying to say that we should extrapolate this and assume that it's going to take four golden crosses, because that's probably not what's going to happen. My point is there's a trend here that just because you get a golden cross, it does not usually mean that that's the rally that's going to take you to a new all-time high. You just need patience generally in a recovery year. You're likely going to see volatility in both directions. You could have a series of golden crosses and death crosses for the next 12 to 18 months, potentially. So I do think it's worthwhile to keep that in mind. If you go back and look at 2015, we can also get an idea of what happened on these golden crosses and death crosses. We had a golden cross right here, and in this case, you can sort of see, let's try to get it up exactly. So the price was pumping into that golden cross. Here was a golden cross where you can see the price actually dumped down from. So this is one of those things where, yet again, the golden cross sort of already tells you something that you know, right? I mean, yes, the price action of Bitcoin has been great. And because of that, you're seeing a short-term moving average go above a long-term moving average. So this is, an important thing to consider. Another thing is this golden cross is the first golden cross we've had since September of 2021. So think about that. It's February. It's, we're almost 18 months. It was almost 18 months ago, 17 months ago, where we actually had our last golden cross. 17 months since the last golden cross. That's a long time. So, this is at least an achievement by Bitcoin, right? So we can, Bitcoin deserves a pat on its back. This is at least an achievement that it hasn't seen in quite a long period of time. Now, we also should check the weekly time frame, because this is something that we've never actually had to contend with or deal with in the past, is a weekly death cross, which coincidentally is going to occur next week, basically the same time when we just got the golden cross in the daily time frame, and now we're going to get the death cross in the weekly time frame, basically at the next weekly close. You can see right now the 50 week is at $25,032, the 200 week is at $24,922. So they will be crossing, and they're going to be crossing right around 25K is sort of the line in the sand where they're actually going to cross. So it's kind of an interesting number that they're crossing right essentially at that prior local high from August. And it's also a 60% move up or so from the bottom. So one thing that you might ask with a death cross is, what does it mean? Well, we've never had one before for Bitcoin, so I don't know what it means. I don't know exactly what's going to occur, unfortunately. Not that I would ever know exactly what's going to occur. We almost had a death cross over here, but it was narrowly avoided. If you go take a look at the S&P 500, there are certainly times where we have death crosses where it led to further downside. But there's also times where we had death crosses that didn't lead to anything. If you go take a look at the S&P, here's the financial crisis. From this death cross here, from that level, the price continued to drop quite a bit until the ultimate low. That's an outlier to some degree. From this death cross, we actually dumped into it, and from that level, the price ended up dropping another 19-20%. But if you go back to, to like the 1980s, the 1970s, there are examples where the death cross still meant that you still had a little further ways to go down in terms of percentage decrease, but usually by the time they occurred, you were still, by that point, you were well within the bear market, and we were getting closer to the end of it by the time the death cross actually occurred. Okay. And there's also, I think, cases where you had a death cross and it didn't mean a thing, right? I mean, here's a death cross that occurred in 1958. And what happened? By the time the death cross occurred, the S&P was already above it, and then we had a golden cross, and the S&P was still continuing to rally. So there's no clear defined thing that, of course, has to occur. Here's another example of a death cross, right? So we had a death cross right here, a very brief one, and then we had a golden cross not too long later, and we never really went back to these lows, right? We never really went back to those lows. I'm not sure if we revisited them later on. It looks like maybe we did. So if we were to draw a line from this level here, where the death cross, the actual valuation at the death cross, or sorry, where the death cross was, not the price actually. Actually, that's interesting. So where this death cross occurred, we ended up revisiting that level. So this was in 1963. We revisited that level in 1974, 11 years later, right? I wonder if there was an investor that just sort of sat on the sidelines right here and did not buy, and then waited and waited and waited, and then finally they're like, all right, time to buy. But what it shows is that, of course, there's no guarantees as to what's going to happen. And one of the things I've said many, many times, and I will continue to reiterate, is that a DCA strategy is likely going to be the best strategy in most cases, just simply because you don't know what the outcomes are going to be. And, whether we go lower or not, we talked about the worst case scenario, but there's no guarantees about anything. I mean, there's always a chance we go lower. There's a chance that we don't. And that's why I think it's worthwhile to be hedged both ways. Normally in crypto, a DCA strategy is what works out the best, right? You DCA according to something. I use the risk levels that I've talked about before, but you can use whatever you want. And then hopefully that works out for you in the long term. But this is going to be the first weekly death cross. I don't mean to hype it up or anything like that. It's just, it's never happened before. So it'll be the first one that has ever occurred for Bitcoin, and we'll see what happens. Note that it's occurring and we're below the actual level where they're crossing. I don't know if that makes a difference in terms of the outcomes or what the likely outcomes would be, but they are crossing at around $25,000, and they should be crossing on the next weekly close. Hopefully this video has been useful for you in terms of navigating these golden crosses and death crosses. My general interpretation of them is that they're lagging indicators, and they're not generally going to be worth our time. Oftentimes, but not every time, they actually mean the opposite in the short term, but then the trend can continue, right? So like a lot of times, a golden cross will actually mean a short-term dump followed by a sustained longer-term move to the upside, whereas a death cross can mean a short-term pump followed by a longer-term move to the downside. Now we're getting a daily cross, a daily golden cross, and a weekly death cross. So, the bulls, of course, are going to point to the golden cross. The bears are going to point towards the death cross. I think you need to be hedged either way. Of course, it's not financial advice. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. Remember, we also have Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.